Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending, and thank you for joining our Food Emergency Pocket Guide webinar that we have scheduled for today. My name is Randy, and I'm with the Association of Food and Drug Officials. We're going to go ahead and just hold off for a couple minutes. We had a lot of people register, so we just want to give them a few minutes before we kick off the show. So go ahead and hang tight. Thank you.
Okay, Randy, I think we can get started.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Jenny. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it might be good afternoon for most folks who are joining us today. My name is Jennifer Piarkey. I work for the Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals. I am the Manufacturer Foods Standards Coordinator. I am also the co-chair for the AFDO of Food Protection and Defense Committee alongside April Hunt, who is with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and John Martin, who is the Department of Homeland Security. Today, we're pleased to have the almost entire subcommittee who worked on this guide to present to you. Mick Mikolos from the National Restaurant Association unfortunately had an event come up and they can't be here today. But today you'll be hearing from Jennifer Bonsky from the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, as well as Brandon Sacita from the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and Todd Rosso from Publix Supermarkets. So without further ado, I'm going to ask AFDO to move a slide ahead. Thank you. And that's the work group that I just talked about. That's all of our names and where we're from. And we'll go another slide, please. There we go. So we'll talk a little bit about the Food Emergency Regulatory Pocket Guide and what it is or what it isn't. And the purpose of this guide is to provide regulators a quick reference on responding to different types of incidents that may be experienced by food establishments. The guide's content is retail focused and it references the FDA Food Code, particularly the 2017 Food Code. However, this guide is applicable to manufactured firms and to industry as well. So you both can use that or use this guide. While each jurisdiction rules and laws are going to vary on how you do food emergency response, the guide is general enough that it can be applied anywhere in the country. The information gathered by this committee is based on professional experience and practical considerations, but we believe it was all pretty good advice. So I caution our listeners that the guide and the tools and the table and so on and so forth or all the tools in this guide are not binding requirements. So don't feel that it's an absolute by any stretch of the imagination. But it is a guide to aid food regulatory folks in responding to most common food events. And of course, it's available at afto.org there. There's the link, and it is also a downloadable electronic copy. So if you were so inclined to go to afto.org right now, get into the publications area, you could download a copy and be looking through it as we are speaking, unless you have a hard copy in front of you, which is absolutely wonderful. The hard copies are available also for order on the website for $10 a piece. So I'm going to hand this over to my co-chair, April, to talk about history and main revisions of the guide.
Thanks, Jennifer. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is I love watching the before and after of home remodeling and makeover shows, and I thought it was fun to see the changes that we've had from our pocket guide back from 2003 all the way to current. So what you see in a 15-year change here. And what I wanted to get at is that our first guide was created, and it was in 2003 with the purpose to address new challenges associated with ensuring the security of the food supply in addition to safety. And so the guide was a collection of best practices from a number of states and other partners. It was updated again in 2007 and 2011, but that was primarily to update contact numbers in the guide, not the content itself. The AFTO Board of Directors approached the Food Protection and Defense Committee with the charge to update the guide, and our working group was formed, and we held our first face-to-face meeting in April of 2017 to begin the revision. And to better align the regulatory and industry responses, this guide is consistent with the Emergency Action Plan for Retail Establishments, Content and Layout. That is the one that's with we wanted to thank and recognize the extensive work that was done by the Conference of Food Protection's Emergency Preparedness and Response Action Plan Committees and Councils 2 and 3. That format and organization was really our influence to better align the industry and the regulatory guides together, and we followed that extensively as we worked on this and assembled it. Once we had a complete draft with our work group, and that was towards the fall of 2017, we sent it out to a number of federal, state, and industry experts for review and comment. So we incorporated everybody's comments and discussed those. And finally, we were able to unveil our third revision of this guide in June at our AFTO annual training conference. So I hope as you go along, you've had a chance to find our download. I think a lot of our presenters today will be referencing different tabs and sections in the guide, and that will help you as you go along with our slides today. Next slide, please. As you can see here on the before and after, the table of contents from the 2003 first version kind of reminds me of a file drawer in my office, that it's got everything stacked in a pile, but it's not really easy to find things quickly. And the new guide, our after version here, uses hanging files, color, tabs. You can just see how much easier it is to find it, and you have a nice organized book. So I think if you do get a chance to order the hard copy, you'll really see the benefit with the tabs and some of the color that really add a pop to finding things in a hurry, as it always happens to be that way in emergencies. But next slide, please. So in addition to the significant change in just the look and organization of the guide, some of the main revisions that we have in our new guide is to include Incident Command System Principles, ICS, and that helps coordinate and respond to emergencies. And we're seeing that more regulatory agencies and industry groups and are working together on using ICS as they respond. So we wanted to have that in our new version. We also, there's so many different types of emergencies, but the book can only be so long. We wanted to make sure it stayed under 100 pages. And so we focused on the most common emergencies that the panelists will start to go through later in the webinar. We also decided to reference the 2017 Food Code, the most current version. And there's an authority section in the guide. It's on page 10. And that list, we took the definitions right from the Food Code of imminent health hazard, and then also took the sections on cease operation and reporting and resumption of operations, key pieces of the Food Code that really give most regulatory agencies their authority as they would go out and work on these emergency responses with establishments. One of the other items that we revised here was that we did take out foodborne outbreaks and weapons of mass destruction and other intentional contamination types of information that was in an earlier guide. And they were omitted really because they became outside the scope of this new guide as we tried to focus in more on more common emergencies. And in the past 15 years, there's a lot of other resources that are available that describe those types of responses in more detail than we ever could in our guide. And then we also added some new sections to the guide, like gas service and pest, and also a risk matrix table that help bring a little more information and unique areas to our guide. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and transition over to Jennifer Bonsky, and she's going to talk us through and walk you through the layout of our guide.
Hi, we can go to the next slide then. So as you can see, we've done color coding for each of the headings in the table of contents. These coincide with color coding that's also through the guide so that it's easier to navigate as a whole. There's also some tabs including planning, authority, natural disaster, no power, no water, contaminated water, and so on, ending with salvage. The inside back cover contains an incident command system planning P for quick reference, and the back cover is the disasters matrix that April referenced and that Brandon will talk about later. Next slide. So the group used icons throughout each section that reflect the topic being discussed. For example, we've got waves here for isolated or minor flooding. There's a toilet for sewage backup and a rat for the pest infestation section. In addition, certain portions or examples throughout each section are highlighted with color for easier reference, and they coincide back to that table of contents. So for example, the risk scale as shown with the arrows, that diagram there, the facility plan considerations, the nature, scope, and duration examples, and recovery considerations are all color-coded throughout each section. So we can go to the next slide and back to April.
All right, I have the planning tab, and you have to always have the planning P on anything when you talk about ICS and planning. It's overwhelming to look at it, but this graphic we really liked. You can see it has different colors and talks about the phases and breaks down the whirlwind of a planning P a little easier. And I think that is just something we really wanted to bring out, those ICS principles this time around. I think you'll also see that in the planning section, you can turn to or scroll to, it'd be page 5 of the guide, that we have some basics as planning is underway with the glossary and starting to look into safety and communications. You know, just an interest in the whole planning is so important. It's really half of the battle, and just looking at trying to how do you mitigate effects of emergencies and hazards, and planning goes a long way to minimize the impact of emergencies and help the food establishments continue and resume their operations quickly. So in addition to talking just about the safety considerations, there's some checklists in this guide that run through what to look for communications. And we also talk a little bit and give recommendations on incident command training that would be recommended for kind of a bare bones in beginning approach. And then also regulators that may serve in a leadership role would look into completing more of an ICS 300, 400 level in some position-specific courses. We also go through, as moving through this chapter here, is some of the equipment and supplies that responders may need, and a checklist of having kind of a ready-go kit as they would be out in the field. Many field inspectors would have these items already, but it's a good double check to run through this list too and see if there's any other items that you may want to add to your field responder kits as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Brandon, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the natural disaster planning and the matrix.
Thank you, April. Hello, everyone. This is Brandon Saucedo with the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about our natural disaster and risk matrix within the guide. So if we transition to the next slide, please. So we're really excited to present this to you today and make available to all of our partners and regulators. And the idea around this section, and specifically the matrix, was really to provide further direction for our regulators when they prepare for and respond to natural disasters. So the Pocket Guide really focuses on those core areas that are emergency situations in themselves, such as the power outage, water outage, sewage backup, fire, etc. But we wanted to develop a matrix that lists the likelihood of those situations occurring for each type of natural disaster. So we developed this matrix, and a survey was sent to the state rapid response teams all across the country, and each state ranked the emergency situation or consequence from risk of occurring from low to high. So we were able to aggregate that data and color code it. So for example, if you look at the matrix on the slide, our rows are the natural disasters, are the consequences, and then each column is that natural disaster. So for example, interruption of electrical services. I see if a drought is occurring, that's a low risk that we're going to have an interruption of electrical service. However, if it's a winter storm, it's much more likely that we may have an interruption of electrical services. So that really allows us to thumb to that section quickly and help make preparations and respond to that incident. And for your convenience, we were able to put this on the back of the guide. So it really allows someone to flip it over, make a quick assessment of what the situation is, what am I planning for, what are we experiencing, and then thumb to those core sections in the manual to help us to better respond to that situation. So I hope that you find this beneficial and a very helpful tool for planning and responding to emergencies, and we'll transition to the next slide and give it back to Jennifer with Iowa.
Great, thanks, Brandon. So the 6 core areas listed here are the most common incidents of food establishments face and us regulators respond to. As highlighted earlier, these same incidences were discussed in the Conference for Food Protection Emergency Action Plan for Food Establishments. We thoroughly aligned this particular guide with those same incidences so we could provide cohesion between the industry response and their guidance and ours as regulators. As alluded to, each chapter has a checklist for references for regulators, some sort of an incident scope table, and considerations, as well as the ever important safety notes. If you happen to have the no power chapter open and available to you, you can also see on this particular chapter a really great set of tables, particularly starting on page 17, 18, 19, and 20. And those particular tables about cold holding were taken out of the Conference for Food Protection guide, and they were done a little bit of tweaking just for the benefit of the regulators and some changes in the guide, or I should say the food code itself. So we kind of added some of those really nice pieces just to help illustrate to the regulators about things that they would be facing in the field. The next slide, please. Truck accidents. So this particular chapter was assigned to me to work on, and I did not do it alone. The Department of Agriculture in Georgia and the Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania provided their procedures to me on how they respond to truck accidents, and also the Department of Agriculture in North Carolina as well. And I used all of these different procedures to put together this chapter on how you might respond to a truck accident if you're a regulatory body. I also got some information from Michigan about milk spills, as well as some USDA information as well. And you will find all of that underneath the truck accident tab, which is the color orange. I want to alert everybody to the fact that on page 70, that is not the end of that chapter. If you happen to have the hard guide in front of you, there is one more page, 71, which gives all the recovery considerations for a truck accident. And those get into really about the product salvage or disposition of a product, which of course are going to depend on your jurisdiction. But these are just some general guidelines for you to consider if you're responding to a truck accident. And so I will hand it over to April to talk about our gas chapter.
Thanks, Jennifer. So many operating companies utilize gas, and there are safety concerns to abide by. So we added a chapter in this guide. It starts over on page 39. And then what is really important to note is, I think, page 41, if you get a chance to scroll there, it really distinguishes between what to do when entering an occupied versus an unoccupied building. And I thought it was quite interesting as we were putting this chapter together and talking about the importance of it, is there's just some simple things about if somebody was to be entering a previously unoccupied facility due to a mandatory evacuation, that as they are to go back and smell the odor of rotten eggs or sulfur upon entering this unoccupied facility, it's imperative that the responders vacate the premises immediately and call 911. And just the distinction of don't call 911 as you're leaving the building, but make sure you're quite far away when you place that call, and those safety considerations are items that this book points out. It's a simple distinguishing fact of where to place that call and things to think about what to do, especially something like gas that could happen so quickly, that this chapter was an important piece of adding something new into our revision. And I also wanted to make sure that we really had a lot of information and input from the American Gas Association. So we wanted to acknowledge them and their willingness to help prepare this section to add into our guide here. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Todd, and he's going to talk about our pests chapter.
Hey Todd, this is Afto. Make sure you're not on self-mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Thank you. Sorry about that. So, yeah, my name is Todd Rosso, and I work with public supermarkets as a retail food safety manager. And as Jenny pointed out earlier, the section around pests really didn't exist, but the team felt that there was a lot of importance about putting that section out. Think about all the things that can impact a location from a hurricane: power loss, structural integrity opportunities, flooding. Those types of opportunities are where we look at of where pests could really have an impact on our on the business. Relative to rodent activity, if you had a lot of garbage that was being accumulated, or if you had maybe it's a generator that's been attached and you have to void through a structure to put power cables through, you do need to make sure that the structure is well intact. So these were some great guidelines that the team worked collectively at to put together relative to, identifying harbor areas, cleaning and sanitation challenges, waste management and recovery. You think about some areas during a hurricane or flooding that you're not able to get to have the waste hauled away. How are you going to manage that debris and garbage, and also to be able to protect other residents or other businesses that may be operating from pest intrusion opportunities. So we did have some feedback from some reputable pest control providers, and I do want to thank the feedback that they provided, as well as some other retail businesses. So thank you for the opportunity. Kind of turn this over back to Jennifer. Thank you.
So next slide, please. So food product salvage is addressed in two main areas of this pocket guide. First, back on pages 17 through 20 that Jenny talked about earlier in the Disrupted Electrical Service No Power section, we have kept copies of the 2012 Conference for Food Protection time and temperature charts with 3 different examples. We didn't make any changes to these because these were approved by that group. We just put them in here for that reference and consistency. These show different time and temperature storage combinations of temperature control for safety food items and a matrix for either holding, serving, selling, or disposing of affected product. Secondly, the salvage section of this guide, starting on page 72 towards the end of the guide, discusses disposal of adulterated food, disposal of hazardous waste, and possible reconditioning. We have also provided a food salvage assessment guide broken down by type, by emergency response, type of food, what action should be taken, along with explanation or instructions. These are also color-coded to coincide with the table of contents and the chapters throughout. Next slide, and I think we're kicking it over to question and answer period.
So what we can do now for the attendees who are on the line, we're going to go ahead and unmute all the attendee lines. And what we can do is if anyone has any questions, feel free to just go ahead and ask that question. All right. Look like we have any questions at this time. Okay, good attendees. Okay, Jenny, you okay?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question to April about feedback and how folks could provide feedback about the guide.
Thanks, Jenny. We definitely want to hear your feedback about this guide. This is the 3rd revision, but we're prepared to have a 4th and a 5th revision. There's probably something in here that is missed or could be improved, and it's a constantly worked document. When you download the guide, there is a link on AFDO's website just below the download that has a Survey Monkey. And so just go ahead, there's a couple questions there and then an open field to put your input about the guide for improvements and suggestions for that next edition. And also, if you want to join our work group, we are a fun group, really. Let us know that too, and we'll get you on the next run around.
And then we have a question from Susan. She said, did you consider a less conservative discard policy for TCS food? With the amount of food wasted, we get this question often.
No, we stuck with the CFP guidelines from 2012. We didn't adjust those at all for this one.
And that's one of the things too, the Conference for Food Protection, the Emergency Action Plan for Retail Food Establishments. We used the 2014 guide, and that's another great resource for anybody on the webinar today to go ahead and head to the Conference for Food Protection page, and you can get a copy of their guide. The easiest way to do it is just Google EAP for retail establishments, and that's the first one that comes up.
We have a follow-up from Susan. She said, are you working on guidance for operators with the new allowance in the 2017 FDA food code for the extended power and water shortages under an approved plan?
Unfortunately, we can't see the question. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. Are you working on guidance for operators with the new allowance in the 2017 FDA Food Code for the extended power and water shortages under an approved plan?
Okay, so it was a question for operators. We are currently not working on anything. That may be something that come out of the Conference for Food Protection. If there's going to be any sort of guidance put together on what regulatory agencies may or may not want to do when reviewing pre-approved plans, so to speak, for the events described in the 2017 Food Code, that may be a good discussion for our committee as we move forward, but I would kick that back over to the Conference of Food Protection to see if they are going to pursue providing any sort of guidance for operators based upon the changes in the 2017 Food Code.
And each chapter does talk about how food regulators may review or pre-approve an emergency plan to ensure it addresses issues and decisions the firm will have to make to minimize uncertainty when the type of incident occurs, like when a power outage occurs. And I think those are some of the things that we've highlighted in the facility plan consideration sections, is that if they're meeting these things and as a regulator you've talked with them, I know sometimes we are not allowed to approve things in Michigan, but if it seems to be an appropriate plan, that they would then go ahead and be allowed to operate following their plan. So it does talk a lot about that, planning ahead of time, talking with your industry people, and getting these plans in place, if that helps.
Thank you very much. And we'll see if anyone else has any questions. There's also ability to submit your question through the attendee prompt for when you logged into the webinar. So feel free to use that as well.
One of the other questions that comes up with our guide is what kind of audience could we share this with, or there are some methods for recommendations that this work group had for distribution. Jenny, I don't know if you had a couple of responses that you could help us with.
Sure. In truth, what we actually just did this week is we shared this guide with our members of our Food Safety Task Force, and that is made up of our academic folks from our universities, our federal and local folks here in the state of Iowa, or, well, they work with the state of Iowa, I should say, as well as our other state agency partners. And I know I'm missing somebody in that group, our laboratory folks, and our industry members. So they all got a copy of the guide, and we walked through it, and that's a great audience to share this guide with and see what they have to say about their plans for emergency response, and open a discussion about it. But that is a group that we're looking to share with continuously, and as well as if you have a rapid response team in your state, you might have some partners there that may benefit from seeing the guide and sharing that guide with partners that are involved with that. And actually, April, do we have any improvements to the guide that we know are coming up?
Well, one of the things we noticed right from the get-go was we were excited about the tabs, but they're paper tabs, and we need them to be a little more rugged as they get jammed in and out of cars and bags and are getting used. So what I think you'll see, and for those that order the guide in the next couple of months here, is that our next printing will have plastic-coated tabs, just so those don't get ripped up as easily, so you can see it that way. We continue to have the guide have a spiral bound side to it as well, so you can flip it open and have it lay flat, and that always helps too to keep that open, as you can use that as a reference tool.
Well, do we have any more questions, Randy or Christina?
It looks like the question queue is empty at this time.
Okay. Well, if anyone does have any questions about the guide, you can feel free to reach out to the chairs of the Food Protection and Defense Committee. I think our contact information is on the AFTA website, right, Randy?
Yeah, correct. And if you go to the AFTA website, you can click on committees, and then you can find the Food Protection Defense Committee, and you should be able to reach out. And if not, if all else fails, when you go to the AFTA website, if you click on contact, we can route you through the AFTA office. Any question you may have about this guide or any other publications, make sure to get you in contact with the right committee.
Great. Well, if there isn't any questions, I think we can close for today, and I really appreciate everyone attending, and I appreciate all my committee members participating today on today's webinar.
Thank you.